about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Hello, good evening and good afternoon, and welcome to the latest in our A-level politics live streams. We've done several this year already. It's great to see lots of you joining us live this evening, and I'm joined as ever by Kira. Hi, Kira, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm not bad, thank you. Yeah, jolly good. We've got the media this evening and the media impact on voting and voting in elections, which does feature on that advanced information for the summer exams, doesn't it? We've got this section on the media, and it's it's nicely vague about the impact of the media on politics, and we're going to look at it tonight in terms of how the media might impact on how people have voted in general elections. I think also we're going to do a little bit of more general voting behaviour stuff, perhaps to start with, just to set a bit of background and set up the discussion about the media and that debate about the media. If you are watching live, you've got the live chat window. Please do join in the activities in there, as you do every week, but it helps us. We know you're listening, and we can interact with your comments. If you're watching on replay, catch up, then obviously you haven't got the live chat window, but you have the advantage of perhaps being able to pause the video for a little bit and have a little longer on some of these. Shall we get straight to it, Kira? Shall we get to the first activity? I think it's you to start with, isn't it? The application gallery. Yeah.
Thank you. So exactly as Duncan said, we're going to not just think about the media, because with the advanced information, it did say they're giving us the information to focus our revision, but we still have to have a good understanding of the whole course. So just bear that in mind for some of these activities, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to show you some images, and you need to think about what voting behavior factors can you associate with the images. It's going to be 3 images. Can you work out the voting behavior factor? And can you also work out maybe a connection between them? Okay, and just kind of put that in the chat. So let's start off with the first 3 then. Okay, so what voting behavior factor is being represented in each image, and can you work out the connection? So you're going to have about 60 seconds. Let's see what you can put down in the chat. So what are the images representing in terms of how people vote?
Is that Stormzy on the first one? I know that isn't the voting behaviour thing, but just so I recognise. On the right. Yeah, that's Stormzy.
A relevant reference for music industry for once, Duncan. Age appropriate.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see, as Duncan pointed out, you've got the first image is Stormzy and Jeremy Corbyn. So maybe what could that perhaps represent? Obviously, those two had very close connections during the election, with even Corbyn opening for Stormzy at Glastonbury, which is very odd. I've never really seen that before. But yeah, so what could that maybe represent, and how could that kind of influence how people voted? So think about, what does Stormzy represent then? And effectively, Stormzy represents a very clear region of the country. So much of his music is very grime inspired, which is a London based music genre. So when we're thinking about that first one, then that's about this idea of region influencing the way that people vote. And obviously, Corbyn was quite popular in some parts of London. The other thing to think about as well is age. So Stormzy obviously represents a younger demographic, and by him kind of highlighting Corbyn and Labour, it kind of did help encourage other young people to vote. So age also influences the way people vote, as well as ethnicity too. So how does a person's ethnic background influence the way that people vote too?
Yeah.
Okay,
I guess there's a media link there too as well, isn't there? Because obviously you've got, quite high profile people in a particular media, in music, popular music, endorsing a particular party and particular party leader at that time.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like how that message was put across in social media, like the fact that there was the song, the kind of repurposing of the White Stripes song for Jeremy Corbyn, and that got popular because of maybe more so social media rather than mainstream media.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. Yeah. And then, of course, number 2 is looking at the idea of gender. So how can gender influence people's votes? So it's interesting again because it does link, everything links to media, of course, but when politicians are thinking about how they're going to win elections, they think about these demographics and they think, okay, so for example, with Boris Johnson, for when they wanted women to vote for Boris Johnson, they put adverts about families, and they kept Boris Johnson away from any kind of adverts, targeted adverts on social media for women. But for men, they tended to put Boris Johnson heavy on their kind of advertising campaigns. And of course, the last image is a picture of Eton. So it represents social class too. Although when we're thinking about this as a signifier of the way people vote, I think we were already saying for quite a long time that it's not the way that people really vote anymore. And I think 2019 has just proved that, working class people don't necessarily vote for Labour. It's not quite the same world anymore. So, of course, the link between all three images is that these are the social and demographic factors that influence voting behavior. Okay, so let's kind of think about maybe some of those other things that influence voting behavior. So, non-social factors. So, can you give me three kind of different ways that non-social factors influence voting behavior? So, things that aren't to do with demographics necessarily. So, you have a minute, just put down any ideas that you can think of in the chat.
Might be 30 seconds this one, but
It's a bit more fast paced, this one, isn't it? Okay, got a good answer coming through. You know the key word for that, actually. So issue voting is correct. What's kind of other word that we could use, which we'd never use in normal conversation? Excellent. Yeah, true. Yeah, exactly. Something like that. It's a variation of that word, actually. Okay, good. All right, so let's see then, and we'll put up the answers. I mean, of course, maybe other things that you can put down too, but you're right. Yeah, so issue voting is a big part of the way that people vote, right? So so issue voting is important, but also, of course, the general perception of the party too. So valence. So how is the party perceived in the media? Is the party perceived, for example, and you put down economic factors too, is Labour perceived as being competent with the economy? And obviously, we've seen since 2010 that rhetoric that Labour isn't good with the economy is still kind of feeding through whenever even Keir Starmer tries to scrutinise Boris Johnson. Well, Labour, you don't know how to deal with money, and that does affect them negatively in elections. So well done for picking up on that. And then, of course, you've got party leadership. So, for example, Corbyn was incredibly unpopular by many people in the country. And that kind of meant that, again, linking to media, he was kind of perceived quite negatively across the press too, which did put people off of him. I've never seen people so reluctant to vote for a party because of a leader in the last two elections. And the last one, which you mentioned too, about this idea of issues, is salience, which is the party's position on an important issue at the time of an election. So, for example, Labour took a while for Labour to become more pro-Brexit, whereas Boris Johnson was saying that he was going to get Britain out of the European Union. And because a lot of the people supported leaving Europe and all just wanting to get it over and done with, that issue proved to be kind of the deciding factor in the 2019 election. So that's quite important too. Okay, so good answers though. Thank you.
Yeah.
And over to you, Duncan.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how we've kind of gone from that kind of sense of, a kind of, I suppose, an ideological thing that people would, voting on whether things are left or right wing or what, or the, to, what their position on the issues that are considered to be important, the salience, and then the valence. Are they seen as being competent rather than do I believe in their core aims? It's quite interesting, especially in recent elections where there has been quite a big difference between what parties wanted to do compared with, the 90s and 2000s, where perhaps the parties were closer to each other ideologically than they were in the last two elections. Anyway, that's just
it definitely seems like that. Yeah, it's kind of like people will hop between parties now, which is quite a new phenomenon. It didn't necessarily happen before. You kind of voted where your parents voted. But yeah, really true.
We've got some Sun headlines here. Now we can have a nice debate about how important it is what the Sun puts on its front pages. Does it really have an impact on how people vote? But these are some Sun headlines associated with some general elections. So we've got some general elections down the left-hand side: 92, 97, 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019. We've got some Sun headlines from either just before or just after those, or the day of those elections, or the results. All I'm asking you to do is to put them in the order. Link the headline with the election. Some of them it's probably pretty clear which one it is because of the names of people being mentioned. But here we go. Let's have a look, see what you think. Okay, we haven't got a timer on this one, so just give you a little bit of time to have a think about it. You might recognise some of them. So yeah, we've got F6 2019. Boris ticks all the boxes. That sounds like it would have to be that one too, because that's our election when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. So that sounds promising. Any others we can?
They're brilliantly terrible Sun headlines, aren't they?
They are, yeah. Some of them are, because you don't mind a good pun, but none of those are a good pun.
They're terrible. Yeah. It's more like you could go into like a primary school and they would come out with better ones, but maybe I'm being unfair.
We've got E3 2017. Don't chuck Britain in the core bin. Yes, you're right. Well done, Frank. That was 2017. I think it was accompanied with a picture of Jeremy being put in a sort of bin. Oh.
It's very clever, yeah.
Yeah. Any others? There's probably one other where it's reasonably obvious from the fact that someone's named in it, although that person was leader during a number of elections. I suppose there was one where the Sun backing someone might make a big difference. You might also have an idea what the Save Our Bacon could be about. You might make a link there. Got 1D, Save Our Bacon 2015. Well done. That's Frank again. Yeah, that was Ed Miliband eating the bacon sandwich, if you remember that. And there was a picture of Ed Miliband apparently struggling to eat a bacon sandwich with the headline, Save Our Bacon.
It's just cruel. Can't even eat sarnie.
So we've got most of them now, haven't we? So we need to find one for 1992, 1997 and 2010. You've got D, E and F. Well done. So you've got half of them. What do we reckon with the remaining ones? I think you can do this. This is why I'm not skipping on super quick, because I reckon you can do it. There's a very famous one.
It was the Sun what won it. It was a very big one, wasn't it?
That was a very famous
huge
one.
turning point.
Who did they
win?
Again,
why what spelt like that? I don't know.
I think because it sort of looks a bit like one. I don't know.
Right. Okay,
yeah,
maybe,
no, I don't. Maybe. I genuinely don't know, but that is how they spelt it. Yeah, it's very odd.
From the bingo.
So we've got the Sun backs Blair. That I'd have thought that one out of those three remaining years, we should be able to spot which one that would be. We've got Labour's lost it, and I'll give you a clue. That was what they were saying. Labour had lost was the support of the Sun, so that might help spot it. It's quite interesting, of course, that Frank's come in with A5 1992. It was somewhat won it. B4 1997, the Sun backs Blair, and C2 2010. Labour's lost it. Well done, very good. Yeah, some interesting headlines there, and it is interesting. I mean, people can say, well, it's not. There's not a causation here, but the party that the Sun has backed, has won the elections. I guess 2010 and 2017 would be the ones where you could say up to a point, because obviously there were minority governments or a coalition government 2010. Yeah, no party won a majority in those two elections, but the biggest party was still backed by the Sun. But they have been backing the winner for a very long time, right back into the 70s. And it is interesting that, like say in 2015, while in England they were saying don't vote Labour because you'll be basically voting for the SNP because they'll end up doing a deal with the SNP. In Scotland, they were backing the SNP because they back the winner there too. So it is interesting, and then that does make you think. Well, are they causing the change, or are they in fact just backing who they they're just good at picking a winner rather than them causing the winner. Okay, I'm gonna pass back. I think.
Cool, thank you. Right. Yeah. So that was me. So we're going to think about kind of with the knowledge, how do we apply that to an essay? So thinking about things analytically a bit. So a bit of AO2, considering connections between arguments and arguments and factors. So let's see what kind of argument we're looking at here then. So we're thinking about the outcome of elections, and these things surrounding the circle are things that influence the outcome of elections. And what I want to think about is the spinner is going to spin and it's going to choose one of these, and we need to think, okay, how can this factor influence the outcome of an election? So let's see what goes first.
Where's it going to stop? Yeah.
Okay. Opinion polls, perfect, right? So how is it that opinion polls can influence the outcome of elections? Just any ideas you have, put them down in the chat. How can opinion polls influence elections?
And of course, this does link to the media, doesn't it? Because the opinion polls tend to be, they tend to be done by a newspaper as well as a polling company, and they're public. The only reason we know about the results is through the media, so that it is part of the way the media impacts things. Zaina, yes, they. If you go to, I'll explain at the end, but 222.net/live, you'll be able to watch all our previous ones and this one again, and we do put the PowerPoint up there. It might not be there immediately, but if you come back, you'll be able to download the PowerPoint. Yeah.
And yeah, so even though, and yeah, exactly as Duncan said, even though it doesn't directly say the media, but it is actually part of the part that's included on the advanced information as well. So it is included in that, so it's quite important. Great answer. So it may lead swing voters to think a party is better than another. So that is very true. Yeah. So it can influence the way that parties think about, people think about parties. Good.
Yeah. So that could have two possible effects, couldn't it? Well, yeah. If it makes you think they're better because most people like it, then that can have, the effect. I'm trying to remember the word. There's a good term in there. It'll come to me in a moment. I can only remember the opposite one. If it makes you vote against the party that's winning in the opinion polls, that's called the boomerang effect. Bandwagon effect. Yes. So the one mentioned there is like the bandwagon effect, isn't it? Everyone's voting Conservatives, I'll vote Conservative too, would be like the bandwagon effect. Alternatively, it's like, I better turn out and vote because it looks like the party I don't like is going to win. So that's like the kind of boomerang effect.
Yeah, exactly. It can affect turnout. That's a really good point. If a party that you're not that fussed about, but it looks like they're doing well in opinion polls, you might actually decide not to vote. I think that happened a lot with Brexit because the polling was suggesting that Britain wasn't going to leave the EU. And I think some people didn't go and vote because of that. And then before that happened, Nigel Farage was saying we need a second referendum if it's too close. And then he changed his mind when he realised that he won. So that was interesting.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people point to 2001, don't they? That it was a foregone conclusion that Labour would win the 2001 election, and then it did have historically very low turnout. And part of the reason would be people say, it doesn't make any difference if I vote or not because we know what the outcome will be.
Yes, very true as well. Apathy as well as apathy. And so Frank said it may mean that if one party is leading by a significant margin, it could lead to, Frank brilliantly said it, so it could lead to apathy from traditional Labour voters and red wall seats who see no point in subsequently voting. Well done, Frank. And yeah, you're right. So, and we can see actually how this links to other parts of the specification too. Apathy is an issue within democracy. If people don't vote for governments, are governments actually legitimate? It's a really good point. The other thing as well is opinion polls aren't just important for deciding how people vote, but kind of connecting back to the idea of salience. It's about thinking what a politician can do is put across ideas to the public and see how the public polls on those ideas too. So it can be used to assess the kind of importance of different issues as well. So exactly as you said, it can influence if people actually go out and vote on that day, but also in terms of, are politicians putting forward ideas that are popular with the people? They can kind of test them before they put them out there and fully commit to them, or hide in the fridge if it goes wrong as well. Okay, so what's the next one? Let's have a look. Let's see where it stops for the next factor that we're going to talk about and make a connection to.
I'm going to guess it's going to start. Oh, yeah.
Very nice. Yeah. Okay, so media bias. How can media bias influence the outcome of elections? So Duncan's already talked about the sun, where you can see, I mean, we can argue whether that does have an effect. But that is the whole point of the essay. You need to be arguing yes, no, and thinking about both sides. So media bias is quite important. How does it kind of influence the outcome of elections?
So we have the very obvious bias in the newspapers, don't we? Because they are openly biased. But there's obviously a lot of debate about potential bias in broadcast media as well, isn't there? Right? Most parties think that the broadcast media is biased against them. And,
which means they're doing a good job, right? If you're annoying everybody, then it means that, you're doing something right.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
It's like there was the song that reached #1 in, I think, 2017. Oh, what was it again? Oh, I've forgotten. It was called Liar.
Oh,
And
right.
it reached #1, but they weren't able to play it because it
Yes.
breached broadcasting rules. So there are very
I
strict
remember the one you
rules.
mean. Yeah, she's a liar. Yeah.
Yeah. So if the majority of the mainstream newspapers are backing one particular, it will most likely win. And brilliant, Frank again, excellent example. So Tony Blair in '97, backed by the Sun, and that helped him to win the election. Boris Johnson 2019, winning quite a sizable majority. So yeah, it's quite important. So media bias, especially in the press, has a lot of influence. So that's the media, but then it does link to demographics, because older people tend to read newspapers. Older people tend to vote more than younger people as well. So it does have quite a big effect. And also, there are just more older people than younger people too.
Yeah. And it's also worth bearing in mind that a lot of the others relate to me potentially to media bias, doesn't it? Because when we think, people might not like or like a party leader, how do they know? The very, very few people know them or know anything about them. They only know what's filtered through the media, isn't it? So that media bias can affect perceptions of party leader. It can affect perceptions of politics, whether we know about a scandal or not. What we think people, whether we think people are any good with the economy or not. So an awful lot is filtered through the media, isn't it? Everything really.
Yeah. And we see that with a lot of free press as well. We're seeing more free newspapers being circulated. So a lot of people are being kind of swayed by those papers because it's the way you consume your media. It's easier. Cool. So I think over to you. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've got a bit of data to look at here. This is from some research that was conducted by the University of Loughborough that looked at, again, it's the newspapers, and we can have a bit of a debate about to what extent people get their views and news from newspapers anymore, and that's an interesting debate as well. But it's about the overall evaluations in the newspaper. So in other words, whether people were saying there were positive things about them or negative things about them. This was in the lead up to the 2019 election. To what extent newspapers and newspaper articles in the main newspapers, or the most famous newspapers, concluded positively about each of the parties. So where it says Brexit there, that's the Brexit party as opposed to the issue of Brexit. So to what extent did newspaper articles and items conclude positively or negatively about each of the parties? Now this has been adjusted to take into account circulation. So the newspapers which more people read are getting more weight than the newspapers that fewer people read. Although the graph doesn't look that different without the weighting. In fact, the Conservative graph is higher without the weighting, but the Labour graph isn't quite as low. But it's still the same general overall trend. The reason for doing that is just obviously more people read the Sun and the Mail than they read read the Canary or something. But anyway, I'm going to click the clock, and I want you to think, what's this data telling us? What does it Can we account for it? Why is it like it is? Did it have an impact? Does it matter? Okay, those sorts of things. Have a think while we have some moody music while you think about it. Okay. It's quite interesting data. We've got Frank saying that it most likely did have a significant impact on the election. It meant Labour was severely criticised by most papers. This probably led to millions of Britons not voting for them or simply not voting at all. And it could have had that effect, absolutely. I think we've got another one coming through. It hasn't come onto my screen yet there, but could be argued it doesn't have an impact. It's just reinforcing views that people already have. Absolutely, yeah. People often read a newspaper that they agree with, and I think there's definitely a lot of truth in that. And so they probably buy a newspaper based partly on the views they already have, and therefore it just reinforces what they already think rather than challenging it. Although interestingly, with that, it was the Sun that won it headline back in '92. Some research was done among Sun readers afterwards and found that a small majority of Sun readers assumed the Sun was a Labour paper, despite the huge numbers of headlines slagging off the Labour Party in the weeks leading up to the election. So while that does suggest that people weren't necessarily buying the paper that they agreed with, it also suggests that the articles weren't necessarily having a big impact on how they'd vote either. It's interesting, yeah, absolutely. So those are two good points, two contrasting points, but both really good. That it might have had a massive impact. Yeah, it might have really put people off voting Labour. Alternatively, maybe the people buying the Sun and the Mail were going to vote Conservative anyway, so it didn't impact them. So we've got the largest circulation newspapers back the Conservative, the Sun and Mail. There are a few Labour supporting newspapers like the Mirror. Some of the traditional Labour supporting newspapers like the Mirror and the Guardian were probably a little less full-throated in their support in 2019 than in some of the other elections, and so that possibly had an impact there as well.
I think as well, it supports that idea that it's more so that a party loses elections rather than the other party wins. It's because we can see just that negative presentation of Labour in the press meant that Labour was the loser rather than the Conservatives being the winner. It's an argument, but not on its own, I think.
No.
And Frank made a good point about headlines. I think that's true. Sometimes, and especially with Apple News and all these kind of flash news headlines that we see now, people often will just read that and feel like they've understood the issue. So
yeah, and they get shared on social. Yeah, there's a question there: do people still get their news and views from papers? And I think possibly they don't. But it is those news articles that get shared on Facebook and Twitter and things. And as you say, they probably just see the headline. You know, a lot of people won't read the full article, etc. So so it's an interesting one, but that data is a handy bit of data to have in your armoury, because it is quite interesting that there was such an imbalance of reporting, particularly in the newspapers.
Okay, so we're going to think about, so we thought about AO1 and knowledge, we thought about AO2 with analysis, and now we're going to think about AO3 with evaluation and judgment as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at a student's argument, and the evaluate wheel is going to select how are we going to kind of engage with that argument. Are we going to argue against it? Are we going to think about variables or assumptions and things like that? So let's see what the argument is. Okay, so The media is the biggest factor in determining the outcome of elections. That's the argument the student is making. So, what do we have to do with that argument? Is spin the wheel. And there you go. Okay, depends on. So, what will it depend on? So, and I think this is a lot to do with, so we see this a lot in politics. There might be the media is a very influential tool, but it's never the whole tool on its own, right? So, what are the variables that exist for a party to do really well and be presented well in the media and win an election? So, what are the other variables that lead to media success? So just put any ideas that you have in the chat and I'll just answer that question as well. So in terms of how many paragraphs to write, that people have different opinions on this. And what really, I'll tell you what kind of my view of it is. And I've seen that this has been the most successful way. I would say a very short introduction where you talk about the three different criteria that you're going to kind of talk through and argue through. And then you have your judgment. That's it. That's all you need in your introduction. Putting very clearly the three kind of things that you're going to explore in the essay, as well as what you think right slap bang at the start of the essay. Then I would say you need three paragraphs, three main body paragraphs, which are quite big paragraphs. So in each of those paragraphs, you're going to have an argument, a counter argument, and then go back to your judgment. So you're doing quite a lot of things in them. So they're quite big paragraphs. That's why some people might prefer to kind of, so you can do it in a different way where you have like a smaller paragraph with an argument, then a second smaller paragraph with a counter, and then a third smaller paragraph with a judgment. I just think you can get those higher AO2 marks, so comparative analysis, if you do it as one big one.
Yeah,
And then
definitely.
a conclusion at the end where you say your opinion. So yeah, it's kind of however you prefer to write, really.
Yeah, but I would agree with that. That it's better to embed everything into the one paragraph. Really depends
Yeah,
on the
it's more
circulation.
sophisticated. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Frank said it depends on the circulation of the media and of all the mainstream media is backing one party, or is there a large split? So yeah, good point. Like it was interesting. You've mentioned 2010. I love every time you say something, you put an example as well. It's brilliant. In 2010, we saw that the Guardian switched to Liberal Democrats, and that definitely put a spanner in the works in terms of the way that the media supports different parties and so forth. So really good point. What else can it depend on? So yeah, it depends on the circulation of the media. So that's a good point. But how else could the media? Because the media is not always a good thing for political parties. So when is this? When is it good? When is the media a good thing for a political party to win an election? Like even compare Corbyn and or even Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson. There's something that Boris Johnson kind of has that they didn't really have in the same way. Okay, so yeah, we can think about things like charisma. So we can see, oh, right, so the press is important and that is linked to age and the way that different people vote. But also with TV, it's like that is growing in importance. We saw there was the beginnings of some leadership debates. It's kind of not quite stuck in the way that people were thinking it would. But if your leader isn't charismatic, it doesn't matter if they have more TV appearance. So the TV isn't the deciding factor on whether or not a party does well. It's about how they come across on that TV. So it's really important. Yeah, exactly. And Frank also mentioned social media. So important. And we saw the real effects of that in 2017. The Conservative Party kind of overlooked the impact of social media, whereas the Labour Party really went in and focused their campaign largely on social media. The result of that was the youthquake of 2017, where we saw a huge turnout of younger voters, which went very favourably towards the Labour Party. And then in 2019, the Conservative Party decided to put a lot of funding into social media as a result. So it's not necessarily that these things are just tools that will result in your success. It's more so how you use those tools and if you have the right things at your disposal.
No, absolutely.
I did not see Boris so-fi. I'm going to definitely check that out though.
But yeah, the Conservatives really spent big on Facebook advertising in 2019, and it seemed to massively pay off actually, and that sort of cleverly targeted advertising, and that's one of the things with social media is that you don't necessarily notice it, because if you're not the demographic that's being targeted, you don't see the adverts, but your parents might be seeing them. It's an interesting.
It is very interesting.
We're going to finish off with a bit of fun word smash. One of my favourite activity, and it's grown in popularity with the audience. Just if you haven't seen it before, it's a bit like Richard Osman's House of Games. We've got a picture, we've got a clue. In this case, we've got an elephant, and the clue leads you to Antarctica. So you smash them together and get Elephantarctica. So we've got a few of these on media and elections. Let's see how you do with these. So here we go. The C1 swing voter in 1997. So this is a term that was used. A term that was used in 1997 to describe the voter that Labour wanted to try and capture. What do we reckon? If you can get either side of the equation, that'll probably help.
A very appropriate 90s reference as well. I like it. Some theme.
I think people know what the left is, don't they? It's Pokemon, isn't it?
Yeah. It is very fashionable again. It's cool.
Yeah. You might not have heard this, but it's quite an interesting one. If they called Mondeo Man, so Pokemon Deo Man. There've been lots of things. I think back in the 80s there was, or it might have been 92, there was talk of Essex Man and people trying to get Essex Man to vote for him. And then Tony Blair talked about Mondeo Man, and then we've had like kind of Sierra Woman and all that kind of thing. But it sort of comes up from. Sorry. Yeah,
it's the car that you drive.
For some reason, it's to do with the car you drive. Yeah, so it was a Ford Mondeo. It was the idea of a kind of an aspirational, upper working class, lower middle class voter who, the Labour Party could persuade to vote for them. From 1997. Okay, next one. Seats in the North and Midlands once thought to be safe for Labour. I think someone's mentioned this one already today, but not necessarily smashed together with the popular 90s pop group. And I've gone heavily with the 90s today. Well, actually, they started in the 80s, but probably more famous in the 90s.
I think I was listening to the Spice Girls in the 90s.
Were you?
Yeah, sorry. It's not cool,
well done. It is Redwall, and there's no reason for you to know the group on the left, but it is simply Redwall. Simply Red is the group there, and Redwall. And the last one, I've gone for another pop group of yesteryear. A surge in turnout of younger voters, which actually Kira mentioned very recently, so I suspect people will get the right-hand side of the equation pretty quickly, and that's the important one, of course. Much more important than knowing who the group is on the left. Any idea? Have I stumped you? Okay, I'll reveal it then. It is Musical Youthquake. So the group on the left is Musical Youth. They were very popular in the 80s, and it was Youthquake. The idea of young people turning out to vote in 2017, which there's been some debate about to what extent it really happened. There's some interesting articles about it actually, but there was certainly in the initial aftermath of the 2017 election, there was definitely an idea that young people had voted in higher numbers than previously. Okay, we've got loads of resources on the Tutor2 website. You could, if you've got a smart device, you can scan that QR code, and there's loads of activities and study notes, etc. there. We also have resources that you can buy, like our revision guides and flashcards, and you could come and see us live.
In the flesh.
You could come and see us live in the flesh at around the country, in cinemas around the country. So starting next week in in London. So do have a look on the TutorTube website if you're interested in coming to one of those. And there is, you can see all our previous videos down there at tutortube.net/live. And as was asked earlier, we will be including, you can download the PowerPoints from there as well. Are you going to be doing the Sociology Live, Duncan? Yes. And next week it'll be me and Kira. So yeah, if you want to come, along to White City, you can see us both.
Shepherd's Bush.
Yeah.
In Westfield, yeah.
Yeah, the Westfield White City. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's everything for today. Well done, guys. Some really good answers there in the chat window. We'll see you again soon. We are going to be quite busy in the coming weeks with the live cinema workshops, but we'll try and fit in some of these along the way. But in fact, this time next week we will be sort of heading towards London to well, I will anyway. You're already there, but I'll be heading towards London to
shopping centre.
Yeah. All right. So we'll see you soon, guys. All right. Bye bye.
Thanks, guys.